Ready to explore some new worlds?
Always.
Today, we're diving into 12 fantasy novels. And these aren't your typical, elves and dragons kind of stories.
Right.
Each one is inspired by a different mythology.
Interesting.
We're talking Imperial Russia, Filipino folklore, even a dystopian future on space stations.
Wow, that's quite a range.
It is. And get this, they're all dealing with some pretty heavy modern-day issues.
Oh, like what?
We'll get into that.
Okay.
But I think what's really exciting is how these authors are using mythology to examine the anxieties and complexities of our world.
Yeah, it's like they're holding up a mirror to society.
Exactly. Okay, so this deep dive is based on an article a listener sent in, and honestly, I'm already hooked.
Well, let's jump in then. What's first?
All right, so we've got To Cage a God,
Okay.
and this one is set in Imperial Russia.
Imperial Russia.
Yeah, it follows two sisters, Sarah and Galina, who are trying to overthrow this tyrannical ruling class.
Sounds intense.
It is. But here's the twist.
Yeah.
This ruling class is empowered by the gods themselves.
Oh, wow. So it's like challenging the very foundation of their society.
Right. And what's really interesting is how the setting of Imperial Russia plays into all of this.
How so?
Well, think about it. Imperial Russia had it all. Opulence, social unrest, powerful rulers. It's almost like the perfect backdrop for a story about rebellion against authority.
I see, yeah. And adding in those gods just raises the stakes even higher.
Right. It makes you think, if the gods themselves are behind a corrupt system, how do you even begin to fight back?
That's a great question, and one that seems to be at the heart of Saints of Storm and Sorrow, another book on our list.
Well, yeah, this one sounds really powerful.
It does. It takes us to a world steeped in Filipino mythology.
And we meet Lunarin, a young woman who's hiding her goddess-given powers while also protecting others in a convent.
It's mentioned in the article that the story explores the scars of colonization, which I found really interesting.
Me too. It seems like Saints of Storm and Sorrow is tackling some really heavy themes. Resilience in the face of oppression, the rage that comes from historical injustice.
Absolutely. Those are themes that resonate deeply, especially today.
Yeah, and I think using Filipino mythology as the lens to examine those themes is really clever.
I agree. It's not just about escapism. It's about engaging with real-world issues in a way that's both thought-provoking and emotional.
Okay, so we've got Russian political intrigue with divine intervention,
Right.
and a story of resilience and rage set against Filipino mythology.
Quite the variety.
And we're just getting started. But before we move on, is there anything that stood out to you so far?
Honestly, what's fascinating me is how these authors are using mythology not just as window dressing, but as a way to explore these deeper questions about power, identity, and belonging.
It's like these ancient stories offer a whole new language for talking about the things that matter most to us, even today.
Exactly.
All right, moving on, let's shift gears to The Wolf and the Woodsman.
Okay.
This one draws inspiration from Hungarian folklore,
Oh, interesting.
and it features these two individuals from completely opposing sides. Evaik, a woman from a pagan village, and Gaspar, a disgraced prince disguised as a woodsman.
Sounds like there's potential for conflict.
Definitely, the article mentions the story delves into religious zealotry and the search for common ground in a divided world.
Themes that unfortunately feel more relevant than ever.
It's almost eerie how these fantasy novels seem to be mirroring the anxieties and divisions we're seeing in our own world.
Right. And drawing on Hungarian folklore, which often has these themes of duality and the supernatural, just adds another layer of complexity.
I agree. I think it's brilliant how the author is using those folkloric elements to explore the nuances of belief systems and the potential for understanding, even amidst those deep-seated differences.
It sounds like The Wolf and the Woodsman is less about epic battles and more about the internal struggles we all face when navigating a world where different belief systems clash.
Yeah, it's about finding that common ground. So we've got Russian political intrigue with a touch of the divine, a story of resilience rooted in Filipino mythology, and a tale of unlikely allies set against the backdrop of Hungarian folklore.
And this is just the beginning.
I know, right? It's amazing how these authors are using fantasy to explore such a diverse range of themes and settings.
It really makes you appreciate the boundless potential of the genre.
It really does. These books really do make you think.
Yeah, they do. It's like they take our reality and twist it just enough to give us a fresh perspective.
It's like a funhouse mirror.
Exactly.
And speaking of seeing things in a new light, let's talk about some of the books that tackle contemporary issues head on.
Okay, sounds good.
One that immediately comes to mind is A Vicious Game, the third book in the Halfling saga.
Oh, yeah.
This one really dives into the aftermath of colonialism.
Interesting. And it's written by Melissa Blair, who is Canadian Indigenous, so she brings a unique perspective to the story.
Exactly. It follows Kira, Riven, and Killian as they fight to liberate the oppressed halflings from their colonizers.
Right. And I think it's fascinating how Blair portrays the colonizers. They're not just these one-dimensional villains.
You're right, they're complex, they have their own motivations and justifications, which makes their actions even more unsettling.
It really makes you think about how real-world colonialism often worked. It wasn't always about brute force, you know?
Yeah, it was often about manipulating economies, eroding cultures, and controlling people through subtle means.
Exactly. And by giving the colonizers that depth, Blair forces us to confront these uncomfortable realities of how power really operates.
And it reminds us that the fight for equality is ongoing, even today.
Absolutely.
So A Vicious Game is this powerful reminder that even in a fantasy setting, the struggle against oppression is something that resonates deeply with our own world.
And speaking of struggles against oppression, The Will of the Many looks at a different kind of power dynamic.
Oh yeah, this one kind of reminded me of The Hunger Games, but with a twist.
In what way?
Well, instead of this totalitarian regime, you have a republic where societal standing is determined by the collective will of the people.
It's like democracy on steroids.
Yeah, but the book really highlights how even a system designed to be equitable can be corrupted.
Right, it all comes down to individual ambition and how public opinion can be manipulated.
It makes you think about how easily power can become concentrated.
And it raises the question, what happens when the will of the many is actually the will of the few who are controlling the system?
That's where the story gets interesting. We follow Vistalimus, who starts to question the very foundation of his society.
So it's not just a typical dystopian setting. It's about how power can be used in these really insidious ways, even when everyone thinks it's for the greater good.
It's a chilling reminder that we should always be questioning the status quo.
Okay, and then there's Heavenbreaker, which takes us to a dystopian future where humanity is living on space stations after Earth has been destroyed.
This one sounds like a wild ride.
It is. And it blends sci-fi with classic fantasy.
Oh, how so?
Well, we have spaceships and advanced tech, but we also have a very human story of revenge, a struggle against a corrupt system.
It's like they took a classic fantasy quest and blasted it off into space.
Pretty much. And the main character, Sonali von Hodeclair, is awesome. She wants to take down the system that destroyed her world.
She sounds like a total badass.
Oh, she is, but she's also dealing with her own internal demons, which adds a lot of depth to her character.
I like that. So Heavenbreaker uses this dystopian setting to explore the consequences of environmental destruction and unchecked technology, right?
Absolutely. It's a cautionary tale.
It is. Okay, well, let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
We've talked about dystopias and oppression, but let's look at some books that maybe offer a different perspective.
Yeah, sometimes you need a change of pace.
For sure. Now, we all love a good love story, so for those who enjoy romantasy, there's The Curse of Sins.
This is the second book in a series, right?
It is. And it follows Aya, who's destined to save her realm, but also has to deal with forbidden love.
Ooh, dramatic.
Right. And I think what makes it so good is that balance between the personal struggles and the bigger political picture.
You see Aya trying to balance her own desires while navigating these complex power dynamics.
And forbidden love always adds a little extra tension.
Absolutely. Okay, so then there's The Wings Upon Her Back.
Oh, this one sounds very relevant to our world today.
How so?
Well, it deals with a powerful state that uses censorship and misinformation to control people.
It's like they took our fears about fake news and turned it into a fantasy novel.
And the protagonist, Zemeli, is fighting against both a physical and an ideological enemy.
It's a reminder that freedom of thought is something worth fighting for.
Definitely. Okay, and finally we have House of Open Wounds.
This one follows Yasnik, a pacifist priest who lives in a war-torn world, right?
He does, and I think it's a really interesting character study. What does it mean to be a pacifist when surrounded by violence?
And how do you hold on to hope in the face of so much suffering?
It sounds like House of Open Wounds really explores those questions.
It does. It's a story about compassion, resilience, and staying true to your values, even when everything is falling apart around you.
It sounds like a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness and understanding can be the most heroic. You know, it's amazing how each of these books takes something fantastical and uses it to explore these really human experiences.
It's like they're saying, hey, this crazy world, It's not that different from yours.
Right, and it's not just the themes either.
What else?
The sheer variety of cultures and mythologies represented in these books is incredible.
Oh, yeah, we've got Filipino, Hungarian, Korean, Chinese, Egyptian. It's like a global tapestry.
It really is, and it makes you realize how much we can learn from each other's cultures.
For sure, these stories show us there are so many ways of seeing the world, so many ways of telling a story.
And that's what makes exploring these mythologies so exciting. It's like getting a glimpse into a different way of thinking.
A different way of understanding what it means to be human.
Okay, so speaking of understanding, let's talk about some of the books that really dive into power and social structures.
Okay, which ones?
Well, The Bone Shard Daughter uses Chinese mythology to create this world where power comes from bone shards.
So the magic system is tied to something physical.
Exactly, and it makes you think, what would a society built on that kind of system look
What
like?
kind of power dynamics would emerge?
Right, and the book explores those questions. It looks at the consequences of this magic system for individuals and for society as a whole.
Sounds really thought-provoking.
It is. And then there's The Weavers of Alamaxa, which I think offers a really powerful depiction of women and social injustice.
Oh, yeah. In this one, the author uses her Egyptian heritage to create a world where women are the weavers of magic.
It's so cool to see a fantasy novel that centers women like that,
Yeah.
especially drawing from a mythology that's often overlooked.
And the book tackles some big issues like gender inequality and the struggle for autonomy in a patriarchal society.
So it's a must-read for anyone who wants to see more diverse representation of women in fantasy.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of amazing books.
We have. And I have to ask, if you could step into any of these worlds, which one would you choose?
Hmm. That's a tough one. They all sound so interesting, but maybe the world of Five Broken Blades.
Oh, yeah. The one with the royal spy master, the thief, the hitman, the poison maiden, the noble, and the exiled prince.
All murderers forced to work together. What's not to love?
Seriously, it sounds like the perfect mix of action and intrigue.
It does.
I think what I love most about these books is how they show us that fantasy is a genre with endless possibilities
They can take us anywhere, make us think about anything.
and challenge us to see our own world differently.
These books are proof that imagination and storytelling have the power to change us.
They really do. So to everyone listening, go check out these books and start your own adventure.
Yeah.
You might discover new worlds, new perspectives, and maybe even a little bit of yourself along the way.
Happy reading.